Bogart smiled. "I don't care," he said. "I know that you've resigned. Herbie told me." Suddenly, Lanning looked old and tired. "That's not true," he said slowly and softly. "I want to speak to Herbie." "You're playing a game, Bogart. Come with me." At midday, Ash was talking to Susan Calvin. Remember, Susan Calvin is in love with him. At noon, Ash was talking to Susan Calvin. He was showing her a picture of a house. "What do you think?" he asked. "It's beautiful, and I have the money to buy it." Calvin looked at him. "It is beautiful," she agreed. "I've often thought that I'd like to—" She stopped. Ash moved his chair closer toward her. "The truth is this," he said. "The house isn't just for me. I'm getting married." Suddenly, he looked more closely at her. "Susan, what's the matter? What's wrong? Are you feeling sick?" "No, it's nothing," said Dr. Calvin. She could only just speak. "You're getting married?" "Yes," said Ash. "Do you remember the girl who was here last summer? She's going to be my wife." But you are sick. You—" "I have a headache," Susan Calvin replied. "Congratulations, Ash. You have my best wishes. Good luck." And she ran from the room. "This is like a bad dream," she thought. "This can't be happening. Herbie said—" "Oh, Herbie knew. He can read minds." She had reached the door of the testing room. She leaned against the door and stared at Herbie. "Yes, you are dreaming," he was saying. His soft voice was soft and gentle. "You will wake soon. Ash does love you." Susan Calvin nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "It's true, isn't it?" Then she stopped. This was not a dream. "What are you trying to do, Herbie?" she cried. "I want to help," Herbie said. There was fear in his voice. "Herbie is scared." The psychologist stared at the robot. "You wanted to help, but you told me a lie. You lied to me." She stopped. "Wait, I had only—" "I had to," the robot said. "And I believed you," Calvin cried. There were loud voices outside the door. Calvin turned away. When Bogart and Lanning entered, she was standing at the window. The two men went to Herbie. Lanning looked angry, but Bogart was smiling. "Herbie, listen to me," said the director. "Have you talked to Dr. Bogart about me?" The robot looked at the director. No, sir, the robot answered slowly. The smile on Bogart's face disappeared. Repeat what you told me yesterday, he said. I said that. Herbie became silent. Answer me, shouted Bogart. I'll ask him, said Lanning. Lanning is the director. He turned to the robot. Okay, Herbie, listen carefully. Have I resigned? Herbie looked at Lanning, the director, and did not reply. Lanning repeated the question. The robot tried to nod his head, but he could not. What's the matter? What's wrong? Bogart shouted at Herbie. Can't you speak? I can speak, Herbie answered. Then answer the question, Bogart said angrily. Did you tell me that Lanning had resigned? At the other end of the room, Susan Calvin suddenly laughed. She started laughing. The two mathematicians, the two math professors, turned toward her. What's so funny? Bogart asked. Nothing's funny. Her voice was sharp, strong. The three greatest robotics experts all fell into the same trap. We all made the same mistake. But it isn't funny. Please explain, Dr. Calvin, said Lanning. You know the first law of robotics, don't you? She said. The two men nodded. Of course, answered Bogart. A robot may not harm a human. A robot may not hurt a human. And it must not allow a human to be harmed. But what kind of harm? Calvin asked. Any kind of harm, Lanning replied. Exactly, any kind of harm. A robot must not hurt a human in any way. She said, a person's body can be hurt, of course, but someone's feelings can be hurt too. If you hear someone saying unkind words about you, or if you hear bad news, your feelings are hurt. Maybe you expect something to happen and it doesn't. Then your feelings are hurt. A person can be hurt. A person can be harmed in many ways. Lanning frowned. He looked unhappy. But what would a robot know about? And then he stopped. But how can a robot know? You understand, don't you? Calvin said. This robot reads minds. It knows what people think. It knows what people want. You ask him a question, and he gives you an answer. but it is the answer that you want to hear. The other answer would hurt you. He knows that. I keep thinking about the Japanese cultural practice of tatemai. The robot seems to practice tatemai. And that's why he wouldn't answer before, said Lanning. He couldn't answer truthfully. He couldn't tell us the truth without hurting one of us. That machine knows everything, said Calvin. He even knows why he can read minds. He knows exactly what went wrong when he was built. His brain changed when he was impressioned. His brain changed when they uploaded the robot laws into his brain. Herbie doesn't know what went wrong, Dr. Calvin, said Lanning. I asked him, but he couldn't give me an answer. He doesn't know. But Herbie knew this, said Calvin. You didn't want Herbie to give you the answer. Your feelings would have been hurt if you knew that a machine was better than you. Calvin turned towards Herbie. Come here, she ordered. Herbie walked toward her slowly. You know what went wrong. You know the problem, she said. Yes, Herbie said quietly. All right, then, Herbie, tell us. I cannot tell you what went wrong, Dr. Calvin, said the robot. You know that. Dr. Bogert and Dr. Lanning do not want me to tell you. Tell us, said Lanning. No, Herbie cried. I know your thoughts. You do not want me to tell you. I am a machine. You do not want a machine to be better than you. The answer will hurt you. Herbie, said Calvin, you also know that they want a truthful answer. You also know that they want the truth. They want to find out for themselves. They want to find the problem by themselves, Herbie said. But they want the answer to the problem, said Calvin. You know the answer, Herbie, and you won't give it to them. That hurts them. You understand this, right? Yes, Herbie cried. And if you tell them, that will hurt them too, Calvin said, and she walked forward. Yes, yes. Herbie stepped back as the psychologist came toward him. You can't tell them, Calvin said slowly. You can't tell them because that would hurt them, and you must not hurt them. But if you don't tell them, you'll hurt them. So you must tell them. Now, Herbie's back was against the wall. Suddenly, he fell down onto his knees. Stop, he cried, and he lifted his hands to his head. But Calvin, Dr. Calvin, did not stop talking. "You must tell them," she said in a cold, hard voice. "If you tell them, you'll hurt them. If you don't tell them, you'll hurt them." Herbie screamed once and fell forward. His face was touching the floor. "He's dead," said Bogert. His eyes were wide, and his face was white. "No," said Susan Calvin. She laughed. "No, he's not dead. He's just crazy. I gave him a problem which has no answer." "You did that deliberately. You did that on purpose. It was your plan," Lanning cried. "You wanted to make him crazy. He had to be punished." "I wanted to hurt Herbie," she said. "He had to be punished." The director came to Bogert. "Come, Peter," he said, and the two men left the testing room. Susan Calvin did not speak or move for several minutes. Finally, she looked at Herbie and spoke one word. "Liar," she said. I knew that Dr. Calvin would say nothing more about this case. She sat in front of me and remembered the past. Her face was white and cold. Please remember, Susan Calvin is being interviewed by a reporter. "Thank you, Dr. Calvin," I said. "I left her and went to write the notes for my news article. 2 days passed before I saw her again." In other words, I saw her again 2 days later. Chapter 6, Little Lost Robot. It's a new story. When I saw Susan Calvin again, it was at the door of her office. Office workers were removing her things. "Have you finished your article?" she asked. "Almost. I'm almost finished," I said. "Would you like to read it? Do you want to see if I've made any mistakes?" "Very well." "Okay," she replied. Dr. Calvin seemed happier today. I decided to ask her more about the history of robotics on other worlds, on other planets. "What about robots and space travel?" I asked. "Space stations are a little out of date now. Robots developed the hyperatomic drive 20 years ago, so we could travel easily between worlds." In other words, before, space travel took a long time, so they used space stations. Uh, because space travel was taking so long, you need a space station in the middle before you can go finish your traveling. But now robots have created, invented, made a special way of space travel called hyperatomic drive. So now humans do not need space stations because they can travel quickly between planets. Space travel, said Dr. Calvin. She thought for a few seconds. My first experience of traveling in space was in 2029. That was when a robot was lost. Let's start the story. Susan Calvin had never left Earth before, but now she was sitting in the Hyperbase space station. The Hyperbase was part of the 27th asteroidal group of space stations. So this is a large group of space stations. There are 27 stations on asteroids. Dr. Calvin had been brought here by a special government spaceship. The mathematical director of U.S. Robots, Dr. Peter Bogert, had traveled with her. The robot psychologist had received a report about a problem with the robots on the hyperbase. But she was not sure that there really was an emergency, and her feelings about this showed on her face. The robot psychologist was sitting with Dr. Bogert and General Kallner. General Kallner, the head of the Hyperbase project. Bogert looked unhappy and uncomfortable. Kallner looked extremely or very worried. Kallner looked very nervous, worried. We've lost a robot, Kallner said. We've tried everything that we can think of, but we can't find it. We've failed. We need help from experts. Why is this one robot so important? Said Calvin. And why haven't you found it? As soon as the robot disappeared, we started our emergency procedures. A procedure is a plan or steps of action. Kallner replied, all work on the hyperatomic drive has stopped. Nobody can enter the hyperbase without permission, and nobody can leave without permission. So the hyperbase is closed. The general was silent for a few seconds. A general is a military level, a very, very high level person in the military. The general was silent for a few seconds. Then he continued. He went on. He continued to speak. A few weeks ago, a cargo ship landed. It was delivering 2 robots for our laboratories. The ship also contained 62 robots of the same type. We're completely sure of that number. These 62 robots were being sent on to another planet. Why is this important? Calvin asked. And why were emergency procedures started? In other words, why was the base closed? One of the laboratory robots disappeared, Kallner replied. When we counted the robots on the cargo ship again, there were 63. So, the 63rd robot is the lost robot? Calvin said impatiently. Yes, but we don't know which robot it is, Kallner explained. There was silence. Then the robot psychologist turned to Bogart. Peter, what's wrong here? Calvin asked. What type of robots are they using? Hyperbase is using some modified robots. These robots have been changed a little bit, Bogart said. Their brains are not impressioned with the complete first law of robotics. It means these robots have not been taught the first law of robotics completely. Remember, the first law says that a robot must not harm a human. They haven't been completely impressioned with the first law? Calvin repeated. She was shocked. She sat back in her chair. How many modified robots were made? Now, this is dangerous. There are some robots that have not been taught the first law of robotics. A few, Peter Bogart replied. He looked down at the desk. They were part of a government order. The government requested it. Only a few people knew about it. It was a secret, he said. We needed modified robots, said General Kallner. So a few of the NS2 models, called the Nestors, were prepared with a modified, changed first law. This had to be a secret. So all NS2s were made without identification numbers.